Mrs. Evans. Well said. Good evening, folks.
Good evening.
My name is Patrick Gallagher. Pleased to be with you this evening. I'm a local leader of the Indivisible Grassroots Group and an active member of the Whitfield County Democrats. And as such, I'm very pleased to notice that Whitfield County Democrats clean up as well as anyone in the state. In my day job, I work for an international nonprofit active in improving child literacy and nutrition and health. So I understand the critical importance of one of the pillars of Stacey Abrams' campaign for governor, that is educating bold and ambitious children. Stacey Abrams knows that in order for our children to receive an excellent education, we must focus on addressing the needs of the whole child, whether they are hungry, need glasses to see the chalkboard, or need extra tutoring. So believe me when I say that she has the heart, the mind, and the tenacity to effect this change. As minority leader in the Georgia House, Stacey Abrams stopped tax increases on the poor and middle class and fended off attacks on reproductive health. Our legislation also helped military families and grandparents. Our plan to build a Georgia where everyone can succeed, not just survive, includes building a fairer, more diverse economy, educating bolder, more ambitious children, and creating an effective and engaged government. She recognizes that the state of Georgia is not a monolith. From Atlanta to the coast, to the mountains here in the north, to the plains in the south, Georgia has many parts, and those parts don't have to compete over a static pie. Instead, they can cooperate and collaborate to create a stronger Georgia for all. So it is my honor today to introduce Stacey Abrams. This is her third visit to Whitfield County in 4 months, I believe. So it's my honor to introduce her as candidate for governor of the state of Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a little short on you, sorry. I think everyone is, yes. Thank you so much for having me, Whitfield County. There's a woman named Evelyn here. I think you're supposed to help me find an apartment since I'm spending a lot of time here. My name is Stacey Abrams, and I'm delighted to be here. I am originally from Mississippi. I grew up in Gulfport. We were a very inventive state. We're a port on the Gulf of Mexico, so we're called Gulfport. I grew up there, the daughter of two parents. My mom was a college librarian. My dad was a shipyard worker. My mom's the only one of her 7 siblings to finish high school. She nearly dropped out in 4th grade, was convinced to go back, went on from not only dropping out in 4th grade to becoming the valedictorian of her high school. My dad is dyslexic. He didn't become functionally literate until he was in his 30s, but he memorized his way through school. He did so by having friends and neighbors, by having classmates read to him so he could learn. Because if you were a young black man in Mississippi in the 1950s, they just told you were stupid. But my father knew he was smarter than the test told him. And so he memorized his way through, and when they were in the 11th grade, he and my mother met. My mom was tutoring him. He says he wooed her, she says he stalked her, it doesn't really matter, they're now together. And they've been together now for 47 years. But I tell the story of my parents because my parents did everything they were supposed to. They went to college together. My mother got a fellowship and she went on to get a master's in library science. They moved back to Mississippi, and that's when they met reality. Because despite doing everything they were told to do, going to school, getting the degrees they needed, my mother made less money than the janitor who worked at the college. My father, because he was illiterate, even though he had a college degree, had to take a job as a shipyard worker. It was honest work, but but it was not the work that his brain could have allowed him to do. And so my parents teetered between working class and working poor. My mother, being a librarian, really likes words, and she didn't like working poor, so she called us the genteel poor. We had no money, but we had class and we watched PBS. And my parents wanted their children to understand that even though we didn't have much, there were things that we had that no one could take away. So we had 3 rules in my family. The first was go to church, and we went to church a lot. Because my parents wanted us to have a faith that grounded us, something that helped us understand the scope of the world we lived in. Second rule was you had to go to school. You could not miss school. I had perfect attendance until I got the mumps in 11th grade. I think I gave it to my classmates because my mom made me go to school anyway. She thought I was lying. But we had to go to school and we had to learn because my parents taught us that they might be able to take your house and take your car, but they can never take what's in your mind. So education is critical. And then my parents said that you had to serve others. That was their other piece, because they wanted us to understand that no matter how little we had, there was someone with less, and it was our job to serve that person. So we might live in a house without running water for a few weeks, and they would take us to volunteer at a shelter, because we may not have running water or the lights, but there were people who didn't have a place to live. We may go hungry a couple of days or have to use commodity foods from, I don't know if you guys remember commodity food, the really big block of orange cheese that could not be created in nature. You might have to live on that for a few weeks, but they wanted us to understand there were people who didn't have anything to eat ever, and so we would go and volunteer at soup kitchens. We may not be able to go on vacation the way my neighbors in our school could go, so my parents would take us to a juvenile justice facility to volunteer, to see children who had no freedom. My parents wanted us to understand that we weren't allowed to wallow in our circumstances, we were supposed to work. My parents are also deeply manipulative people, so it worked very well. What we got from my parents, what I learned from my parents, was not just what they told us, it's what they showed us. Because in 1989, at the age of 40, my parents decided to become United Methodist ministers. My father had been called into the ministry when he was younger. My mother had been called a few years before, but she resisted because she'd been raised to believe that God didn't call women. Belle South hadn't told them that that wasn't right. But my mother, when she accepted her call, said, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it right. It wasn't enough to want to serve. It wasn't enough to want to be a minister. They wanted the education. They knew you had to be trained, and you had to have the experience to do the work. And so my parents packed us all up and moved us from Mississippi to Atlanta so they could go to Emory University, where they both got master's degrees in divinity at the Candler School of Theology. So I watched my parents go to school full-time, work full-time, and raise 6 children. My older sister just started at Agnes Scott, but she basically lived with us because that's where the food was. But for my parents, it was so critical for us to see that they believed what they said and that they committed their lives to that belief. But it was back in Mississippi that I learned exactly what my parents meant about what we needed to be. As I said, I grew up in the Gulf of Mexico. My dad worked at Ingalls Shipbuilding, which was about 40 minutes away from where our house was. We only had one car, and so my mom would have the car for the day, and my dad would take a ride into work with Mr. Luther. I'm sure Mr. Luther has a last name, I've never learned it. But he would get in the van and go off with Mr. Luther around 6 in the morning. And when Dad had to work multiple shifts, especially around Christmas time, and they really wanted to make sure that he had enough, my dad would hitchhike back if he had to work late. So around 2 or 3 in the morning, he's on his way back so we could sleep for a couple of hours before the cycle started again. And I remember one winter, it was cold and rainy, and my mother woke us up and put us in the car because on those nights she wanted Daddy to at least not have to hitchhike all the way the 40 miles. So we would get in the car and we'd go find him. My older sister Andrea took one window, I was number 2, I took the second window. We're one of 6 kids, so the other 4 would sleep in the back. And I remember driving down this highway in the dark with the rain coming down, and we finally see my dad on the highway, and we pull over, and he gets in the car and he's shivering. My mother looks at him, she's like, Robert, where's your coat? And my dad says, well, I gave it to a homeless man on the beach. And my mom says, oh, okay. Andy and I look at each other, we get yelled at for leaving our clothes outside. Like, why is he not getting yelled at? And so Andrea, being the oldest, I nudge her and she says, Daddy, why'd you give that man your coat? You don't have another one. And my father said, because that man was alone. And in the rain, and when I left him, he would still be alone. But I knew you were coming for me. I'm running for governor of Georgia because I'm coming for Georgia.
All right.
Patrick pointed out that I talk about survival because I think that's where, unfortunately, the Democratic Party stopped our conversations years ago. We spend a lot of time talking about survival, about making do and keeping up. But I grew up in a family that believed in success. My parents never let our circumstances diminish our belief in what we could become. And in a single generation, my parents produced 2 PhDs, 2 JDs, and a social worker with no more money than anybody else. But they believe their children have the capacity for more. And I'm running for governor because I believe all of our children, all of our families have the capacity for more if we're willing to believe in them. I'm running for governor as a Democrat because I know that we know how to get the work done. We know how to educate bold and ambitious children. We know that it has to start with high quality daycare. Because you don't have anywhere to put your child, you cannot focus on doing your work. And particularly in rural communities, if you've got to commute to get to work, you can't worry about having to go back and find where your child is. But we also know that the cognitive development of children begins at birth, not at 3. And so we need to invest in high quality daycare. That is an economic development issue, is an educational issue, is a moral issue. Because if we do not take care of our children when they get here, how can they trust us when they're staying here? We have to begin with educating bold and ambitious children. We have to expand pre-K, and we can afford it. It only costs $4,500 per student. But the issue is we don't pay our pre-K teachers enough to stay in the classroom. So we have to not only talk about educating our children, but we have to invest in their teachers so that they learn at the stage they should. We also have to stop talking about adequacy in education. That may be in our Constitution, but it should not be in our hearts. Excellence in education is what our children deserve. They deserve to learn how to code in 4th grade. They deserve to learn how to count when they're in 2nd grade. And they need to be able to predict their futures by the time they're in 8th grade. They should have every opportunity. Because right now, we educate our children for a low-wage economy because we think that's what they deserve. We have to believe that our children are capable of greatness, and we have to educate them like they are. That's the responsibility of Democrats. That's the responsibility of yours. And once we've gotten them through K through 12, we've got to get them access to grades 13 and 14. Free technical college is a right in Georgia, and it should be funded by Georgia. We have to make certain that you finish high school and finish technical college with a skill, and we have to make sure we bring in our labor unions so they can provide apprenticeships so you can guarantee that the skills you have can be put to work the day one. That's how we change Georgia. That's how we educate Georgia. But our next responsibility is building a thriving and diverse economy. I've been to Whitfield County and Murray County. I've been to Catoosa and Pickens. I've been to Dade County. I was only there once, but I went there. Because when I became minority leader in 2011, I became leader after a gentleman who taught me that while I may live in Atlanta, I serve Georgia. Because DuBose Porter told me that I needed to make sure I understood all the states, all the cities, all the counties, and that, I learned how to pronounce Ludowici properly. And I have. I've been to more than 150 counties in my 7 years as minority leader, because the only way you can serve a place is by knowing that place. And I've made it my mission to know Georgia. And along the way, I've led the race and made sure that we have taken 6 Republican seats. We took one, they took it back. But we've taken 6 Republican seats along the way. Because I know Georgia Democrats can win anywhere we want if we put our minds to it, especially if we talk about the jobs that we need and we are willing to invest in creating those jobs. I don't just talk about economic development, I've been a part of it. Because I've had a business that failed and I've had a business that succeeded. I really enjoy success better. And in my business that succeeded, we moved capital to small businesses, to disadvantaged businesses who were bidding on a contract but couldn't afford to hire workers, to companies that had gotten the contract but couldn't afford to pay for that first payroll. I know how to grow jobs because I've done it. I've signed the front of a paycheck and the back of one, and I will do that for Georgia every day. I will make certain that economic development is what we do. We have to stop stealing stealing jobs from the Midwest by promising to underpay the workers when they get here. We have to invest locally and grow locally and invest locally so we grow jobs in place. And we have to believe that every county deserves to have an economy that thrives. That Metro Atlanta and Savannah are not the only parts of Georgia. We have to be willing to put our money where our mouths are and put our hearts where our people are. I was down in Macon a few months ago and started my campaign, and I met with a woman named Pam. And Pam and I were sitting in her front room, and she had two daughters, 17 and 18. They were both going their way to college. And Pam was describing what she felt about this, how excited she was for her daughters, but she couldn't help but notice that one of her daughters was 9 months pregnant. And I said, well, what are you gonna do? And she said, well, her daughter who's heading off to Young Harris College, that the child would be staying with her. And I understood the issue she was talking about because I've spent the last few years raising money and changing the laws to help grandparents raising grandchildren. 100,000 families in Georgia face that challenge, and we have to give them the resources they need. And she talked about how excited she was that her daughters would have a life that she never imagined. She'd spent 20 years as a cashier at Piggly Wiggly. And I listened to her talk about her excitement about her daughters and her fears about raising a new child when she's just getting the two out of the house. And I said, Pam, what do you want for you? And she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, did you just hear? I just told you I want more for my children, I want more for my granddaughter. I said, but what do you want for you? And Pam said, no one's ever asked me that. And so I said again, Pam, what do you want? And she paused and she said, I want to create a daycare center here in Macon, in South Macon, the poorest part of Macon. Because there are too many girls like my daughter who have children and have no one to help them raise them. They don't have the ability to learn, and there's no one who will take them seriously. That's what I want to do. I said, well, have you tried? And she said, well, no one would ever invest in me. I don't have the training. I don't know how I could do it. I want to be the governor that lets Pam know that her dream is just as valid as any dream that Bill Gates has ever had. I want to be a governor for all of you. I want to be a governor for the baker, for the barber, and the banker, because that's how we change the face of Georgia. But this can only happen if we have engaged and committed government that believes in every one of us. And when I saw that that wasn't truly happening, I decided to help register 200,000 people of color in the last 2 years, because we cannot have a good government if most of the people in our government don't believe that government is theirs. And so we have been out there putting that work. And you may have noticed that Brian Kemp has a little bit of an issue with me, because along the way, not only have we registered 200,000 people, we've sued him a few times, and we've won a few times. We've won because voter suppression will not be the law of the land in the state of Georgia. But more than that, I've worked on the issues that we talk about, that we care about. I started an organization that went down and hired 60 folks to sign up people in Southwest Georgia when the governor of Georgia refused to accept navigators to help people sign up for the ACA. And we boosted sign-ups by more than 20%. I've registered voters. I've hired young people in the Democratic Party, because we can't just talk about creating a new party. We have to make sure that we have people doing the work. So we've hired young people, and we put them to work and pay them a living wage so they can learn how to turn our state blue every single day. That is what I've done so far, and that is what I want to do for our state. Because Georgia is blue. We're just a little confused. That's it. We have a Brenda Lopez in Gwinnett County, because although I think Michael is he's absolutely right about how tremendous Cobb County was this year, they had a partner in crime. Gwinnett County went blue as well. Yes. That did not happen in 40 years. But that can happen everywhere. We've got a Democrat in South Paulding County. We've got a Democrat in Schley County. We've got Democrats all over. We just have to introduce them to each other. And the reason I'm running for governor, the reason Representative Evans is running for governor, is that we believe that together, as Democrats, we can convince the rest of our Democrats to come out of hiding and take power and take our state back immediately. This is our state, and these are our people, and our values are the values of Georgia, the values of fairness, the values of equality, the values of diversity. That these are not weapons and these are not threats, these are our strengths. And if we are willing to walk together, if we are willing to work together, then by God, in November of 2018, we will win together and we will take back the state of Georgia. Thank you so much.